What if I told you that I got a new car 8 months ago, and it's so eco-friendly that all the animals find its presence joyous? The world turns round and round with fresher, unpolluted air, and even the traffic lights turn green in its presence. Not only that, but a big smile also appears on my face every time I press the accelerator. Hello and welcome to Pedanticar. My name is Andrei, and this is the Hyundai Kona Electric. Deciding on buying a car is never an easy task. There are lots of thought processes that you need to run through, and if you take any shortcuts, you run the risk of not getting what you expected because your expectations were so unrealistic from the get-go. Especially when it comes to electric cars, there are many variables which do not apply to conventional internal combustion cars. Cutting it short, I say it's extremely important to do your homework and to manage your expectations so that you don't end up disappointed. So, despite the journalistic hook technique, I will say right now that I'm not at all disappointed with this car, and let me tell you why. But first, a short word from our sponsor, me. This car is my own, along with all the associated thoughts and impressions, and I will do my best to not be influenced by an owner's bias. If you find these clips interesting, please stick around. There are loads more to come. Now, I'm still in the process of finding my voice in this new YouTube venture, so there will be different styles and takes on how I do these car reviews. I will always accept feedback and constructive criticisms, so please feel free to reach out. So what is this car really? Is it a hatchback or an SUV? It seems to be shaped like an SUV, and while the S and V are covered, the U not so much. You will never take this one off-roading, as it has even less ground clearance than most other cars, and it's only front-wheel drive. This, of course, is to aid in the aerodynamics and efficiency, so when you look at it from the side, you wouldn't notice it very well, but if you take a few steps back, you'll see the battery hanging off its belly. That shouldn't be a problem, as I never scraped it, to my knowledge, but it's still an important fact to bear in mind. Despite the chunky plastic body cladding, never take this car off the tarmac. Since we're here on the side, you can observe that the profile is not too different than most other cars in the small SUV range because it was initially developed as an internal combustion engine car. You have the front bit, which is supposed to be the place where you house the engine, gearbox, steering, front suspension. Then you have the middle bit, which is supposed to house the passengers. And then the back bit, which is supposed to store their stuff. This has been the traditional recipe for internal combustion engine cars for such a long time that to divert from it sometimes results in weird-looking cars. When engineers are no longer constrained by the three-box mentality, they come up with more efficient designs which allow for fruits or frunks or more aerodynamic shapes with shorter front bits but much larger interior space for the people inside, or sleeker, more stylish and timeless designs without the need for unsightly over-enlarged grills or fake exhausts. God, I hate those. Anyway, because this car is based on an ICE car, there is no front boot, no enlarged space for the passengers, and the design is quite busy, almost alien looking. It's not an ugly duckling to my eyes, but it's not a pretty one either. It's just a bit strange. What do you think? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Now let's move on to the front. Remember that lack of front grille I alluded to earlier? Well, Hyundai in their infinite wisdom thought it's not a good idea, and instead of flattening the front part, they indented the shape of a grille into the bumper. It does give the car a bit more character, but it also becomes a bug graveyard, which is extremely difficult to clean. Worry not, because the facelift is just around the corner, and yeah, it seems like this is fixed. Now it looks even more weird. It looks like a xenomorph from the Alien franchise, but anyway. Below the fake grille, you'll see a real grille, because it does need some air for the water cooling for the battery, and also the radar sensor for the lane keeping, smart cruise control and smart regenerative braking, but more on that later. It comes as no surprise that the rest of the body panels are quite well fitted, without any particularly wide panel gaps. The doors close with a reassuring solid sound, and I'm quite pleased with the exterior fit and finish. Moving up to the front, what we also have here is the charging port, which is conveniently placed so that most charging cables are within easy reach, but it's also very exposed to front collisions, and even the most minor of bumps could result in quite high repair costs. One very nice thing about the Hyundai Kona Electric is the inclusion by default, at least here in the Netherlands, of a heat pump system. Other competitors are only now starting to offer these, and most of them are doing it as a paid option. The last things worthy of mentioning here in the front are the headlights. Even though they are LED, I'm a bit disappointed that other than the high beam assist, they have no other nice-to-have features. They are not matrix or adaptive, and some lighting elements inside there are old-school incandescent filament-based bulbs, presumably because of cost-cutting, and they can also be found on all 4 turning indicators, reverse lights, and even the rear fog light. Below the headlights you will also see this vent, which is not fake, but its purpose is to divert the front air across the sides of the car over the aerodynamic wheels. Speaking of which, I was surprised to find out it has disc brakes on all 4. Quite a lot of new EVs right now that compete in this segment have drum brakes in the rear. The argument for this is a strange one, is that because the regular friction brakes are not getting used as much, they have a tendency to just rust away. You see, in EVs, the regen braking takes care of slowing you down most of the time, and thus the old-school friction-based brakes don't get as much use as they need to stay rust-free. Here in the back is business as usual. All the elements are there, nothing really to note other than the obvious lack of tailpipes and the strangely placed lighting elements, which again, as mentioned before, are a mix between LED and filament bulbs. There is indeed a backup camera which gets dirty fairly quickly and has no cleaning system, but at least it's good that it's present. While we're here, I might as well show you the boot. It's not large and it's quite comparable to the one in my previous review, the i20. These 2 cars are based on almost the exact same platform, so nothing unexpected here. The back seats are split 40-60 and they do fold to give you an extended and almost flat boot floor. This back here houses the charging cable for the AC street chargers, and it also allows the car to be filled up to 11 kWh. Just bear in mind that this car is a refreshed model made in 2020, so if you get an older one, it might not have this onboard 3-phase charger, and in such case the maximum AC charging speed would be 7.2 kWh. I wouldn't recommend those unless you get a really good deal. If you go to a fast DC charger, the most you can expect is 77 kWh, which adds on average 100 km to your range in 15 to 20 minutes. Just bear in mind that it's not progressive or guaranteed or even predictable. These figures account for the best case scenarios which you will rarely find yourself in. For example, let's say in wintertime you just bought yourself a nice new EV. You might want to take your new EV with, say, currently 60% battery left to a fast charger to do a quick top up, but then you'll be outraged to find that the promised fast charger only delivers a fraction of what you were expecting. There are a lot of external factors to take into account which will affect your charging speed and range. It's not a deal breaker most of the time, but it's a reality shared by all current EVs, and it's worth knowing before you fork out the big bucks for these cars. Surely this will improve as technology advances, but for now, it is what it is. Now returning to the boot, just a few more things to show. The horrible Krell subwoofer, more on that later, the boot floor which hides a couple more compartments underneath it, a removable styrofoam tray for the random things, and some more space beneath it, also containing the adapter for the wall socket, also called granny charger by some people. Do not use this unless you really have to, because it will take more than 24 hours to completely charge your car. It's only there for emergencies. Now that we got that out of the way, it's time to step inside. As with most modern Hyundais, the build quality of this one is exceptional. Perhaps the materials and design aren't as posh as other European competitors, but the fit and finish are. They are rock solid, and I would say above what you will find in quite a few of its competitors, sometimes even more expensive competitors. Everything is solid, and it gives the impression of durability. No wonder you get such a generous warranty. While most EV manufacturers offer you 3 years, I got 5, and for a modest fee I could even extend it to 7 years. This is only beat out by its sister, the Kia e-Niro, which offers 7 years by default. You don't have to pay extra for that one. Suffice to say, I'm worry-free in terms of maintenance. Even outside the warranty, I think these cars will be quite reliable. As with most electric cars, due to the nature of how they work, with internal combustion cars you have so many moving parts all rubbing against each other, creating wear and tear. You also have external factors which directly influence the reliability, such as the air intakes of the engine, the type of fuel that you pour into it, the quality of the oils and the associated filters. Let's not forget about the finely timed internal gubbins of the powertrains, which have to work in perfect harmony for the car to correctly function. Electric vehicles are the complete opposite. They have very few moving parts and are so simple from a mechanical standpoint. The only complicated parts of the electric car are the electronics inside, such as the battery management system. So there's no air intake filter because the motor doesn't need air, no fuel filter because there's no fuel, no oil filter because there's no oil. You can't change the characteristic of the powertrain because there's no difference in the current you pour into the battery, as there is no premium additivated current. It's all so much simpler and cheaper to run. Of course, the suspension still has normal components just like any other car, which will eventually fail. There is still a cabin air filter which will need changing periodically, and the braking system which will need maintenance, especially if the car sits outside for long periods. But overall, the costs are very low by comparison to ICE cars. Not only that, but also the recurring charging costs are quite low per kilometer when compared to normal refueling. I've done about 5,200 kilometers with this car since I bought it back in September 2020, and it only cost me €212.58. That's an absurdly low €1 per day. It might seem too good to be true, but this day-to-day cost is currently offset by the high initial purchasing cost of EVs. As the technology progresses and manufacturing becomes more efficient, the high price of EVs will noticeably decrease within the next few years, and they will make more and more sense. Okay, so looking at the materials in here, I can definitely not feel the €47,330.50 price tag. As I alluded to earlier, there's an initial upfront cost that you have to get over, and what you get in return is not immediately noticeable, especially in this case. This was a platform that was developed to be a cheap super mini alternative to the Polos and Fiestas and what have you, and then raised up and given the old switcheroo where they replaced the ICE guts with EV guts. Of course, this is an oversimplification, but there's no escaping the modest origins of this car. The materials in here are far from premium, and the interior lighting is the classic Hyundai Intense Blue, which I actually have no problem with. There are a few soft materials here and there, but the vast majority is hard plastic, albeit it seems to be hard wearing. This small rant aside, the quality of the fit and finish is again exemplary. No rattles or strange sounds from the interior as of yet, and everything feels quite solid. The seats are quite comfortable with adequate side bolstering and seemingly vegan leather, not entirely sure, so don't quote me on that. They also have heating and ventilation and can be electrically adjusted in almost all directions, including the lumbar support. One word of caution though, you do feel like you're sitting quite high up, like you're sitting on a camel instead of in a bobsleigh. Some people like this feeling, but when your body's center of gravity is higher than the car's, you do feel like you're getting thrown around a bit, which can cause nausea in some people. This particular Hyundai Kona Electric was made in 2020 and it came with a new 10.25-inch infotainment system. It's fairly responsive with good resolution and frame rate, it rarely stutters and it never froze on me, so aside from the boring yet functional overall aesthetic, I'm quite happy with its performance. Once you press the reverse button, it automatically shows the backup camera, which has guiding lines to show you the trajectory based on the current steering angle. This system also supports wired Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, which is the system I almost always use and have very little need to stay within the car's own infotainment system. Since I have an iPhone, I'm fairly used to the interface, which runs at a constant and responsive 30 FPS and is quite clearly full screen. As the infotainment is placed so high up, it is perfectly positioned for a quick and safe glance without the need to take your eyes off the road for too long. Unfortunately, the Android Auto experience is far worse. It seems to be running at only 2/3 of the screen, and as of yet, there's no way to enlarge it. The only redeeming qualities are that you can use pinch to zoom and the fact that it runs at 60 FPS, so it feels a tad more responsive than the Apple CarPlay because of that. Now moving along, I do consider myself a bit of an audiophile, so of course I ticked the box that said Premium Audio by Krell. You might be asking, the what now? Who's Krell? No idea. I googled them and I could only find limited information, but what I do know for sure is that there's nothing premium about it. The bass is boomy, inaccurate and exaggerated. The mids are quite subdued and the highs offer nothing special. The overall sound is meh. There's no particular quality to the sound. There's no soundstage, and yeah, I'm not entirely sure why I paid extra for this, and I can't help but think how much worse would the non-premium option be. The i20 that I drove a few weeks back had the Bose variant which offered much better sound than this, and I can't help but feel a bit envious. Anyway, reverting to the infotainment, I'm happy that it's always connected and I can control certain aspects of the car remotely through the Bluelink app when it works. Unfortunately, this app is a bit undercooked, and as far as I can see, Hyundai is in no hurry to roll out the fixes. Sometimes I turn on the air conditioning remotely before stepping inside, only to get the message that the command was unsuccessful. Most of the time it still worked, because I found the car nice and toasty in the wintertime, but I wouldn't have known it just from the app. Other times it just flat out refuses to connect to the car, but when it works, it's quite a convenient feature to check what's the current range and charge level, how much longer until it's fully charged, are the doors all locked, and if not, I can just remotely lock them, and in case you forgot where you left your car, you can just quite easily open up the map and it will tell you its precise location. All these are great when they work, and I hope Hyundai becomes more serious about its apps. Just take a hint from Tesla. So how about the rest of the interior? Well, the storage spaces are quite plentiful and generous. Unfortunately, all but one are just bare, hard plastic. Only the cubby inside the armrest is partially felt lined, so anything you put anywhere else will have a tendency to rattle. Another very strange omission is the lack of a dedicated glove box light. How could an experienced manufacturer forget about that? Otherwise, there's nothing to note over here, only the buttons have nice and meaty haptics when pressed, and all the knobs and vents feel solid. Not especially premium, but good enough. Room in the back, unfortunately, it's quite limited and suitable for small adults or kids. For example, I could never fit behind myself and my driving position, but I am 1.93 m, so your mileage may vary. The remaining comfort is quite good, and you even get two-staged heated seats in the back for the passengers. So I am quite pleased with the layout and the ergonomics of the instrument cluster, but initially I was a bit disoriented. I did get used to it and eventually found out what everything did, but at first I was just a bit lost and I had to look up some of the icons in the manual. I would say that it took about 1,000 kilometers spent behind the wheel to stop feeling like a confused old man. So after the rant about the kids these days and their laptops and speech about how back in my day you used to have analog dials for speed and revs, you do come to realize that this is the way forward. Speaking of way forward, let's talk a bit about how it goes. The Hyundai Kona Electric comes in two variants here in the Netherlands, one with a 39 kWh battery and another one with a 64 kWh battery. What we have here is the latter, which also has 204 horsepower, 395 Nm of torque and a weight of about 1.76 tons. With stats like these, you can expect a warm hatch performance, and wow, it really does deliver. The 0 to 100 km/h, according to the manufacturer, can be done in 7.6 seconds, but people have measured it to go even 1 second faster than this, and it subjectively feels even faster still. What electric cars offer usually is instant torque delivery, and this leads to addictive strong acceleration runs, which is for sure annoying to the wife sitting next to you in the passenger seat. So when she tells you to cool off, you can put the car in eco mode, and then it becomes very docile and kind, not only to your neck, but also to the overall range. Fortunately, the car always defaults to the comfort setting, which is a nice compromise between eco and sport, but when you feel a bit frisky, just press this button again and the instant torque is back. This is precisely why I wouldn't go for the cheaper 39 kWh variant. It only has 136 horsepower and much lower range, and you will always feel like you missed out on a much better version which was just a little bit more expensive. Other than the power, I would say the handling is also quite good, mainly due to the low center of gravity. It makes the car feel balanced and planted, but the steering feel is missing completely, and the ride does feel a bit bouncy and stiff at times. This seems to be a common trait in most new Hyundais, and I hope they get a better compromise for newer models. The braking is also a little bit strange. In normal driving, this car is slowed down by the regenerative braking and comes to a complete stop by the aid of the conventional disc brakes. The crossover point is a bit rough and sometimes results in quite abrupt braking, regardless of how gentle you are with the pedal. One extremely convenient feature is the radar-assisted regenerative braking. You see, behind the wheel you have two pedals that you also use to increase or decrease what would conventionally feel like engine braking, but with a twist, as it also regenerates energy and stores it in the battery. You can hold down the right pedal and make the system adjust the engine braking force by way of the radar, which senses the cars in front and automatically brakes harder when it's obvious that you need to slow down or stop. Initially it's a bit jarring because you feel like someone else is applying the brakes for you, but you quickly get used to it, and it's been quite reliable. Speaking of stopping, I think it's time we wrap this up. So what do I think about the Hyundai Kona Electric, taking into account all the positives and the negatives? I think it feels just one step away from being a truly accomplished car, and that's a real shame. There are many things that Hyundai got right with this one, but there are also quite a few that can be improved. So to circle back to the beginning, these are all the reasons why I'm not entirely disappointed with this car, plus the fact that I got a pretty good deal from my dealership. You see, when you are committed to buying a car model and you know exactly what you want, there's no harm in doing a bit of haggling unless you're fine with leaving money on the table. Also, the refresh of this car is just around the corner, so dealerships will be eager to get rid of their older stock. For the right price, I think the Hyundai Kona Electric is quite good, and with a range of almost 500 kilometers in ideal conditions, it's one of the best electric cars you can get for the money. Hopefully you got all the info you need to make an informed purchasing decision concerning this car, but in case you still have questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. Depending on how many I get, I will either make a subsequent follow-up Q&A video or just reply to your messages. Thank you very much for watching. If you liked this video, you know what to do, and see you in the next one.